Ladies and gentlemen, the show is about to start. Please switch off your mobile phones and remember there is no photography and no video during this evening's performance. And before we start, let's take a moment to reflect on the genius of Mr. Trevor Horn. From Seal to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, from ABC to Yes, from Grace Jones to Belle and Sebastian, and from Robbie Williams to the Pet Shop Boys, one man has been at the heart of some of Britain's most important pop music over the past 50 years. Super producer Trevor Horn has been described as the man who invented the 80s. He was also responsible for the sound of such bands as Dollar, McLaren, t.A.T.u, and countless more, including Hans Zimmer, Marc Almond, Tori Amos, Gabriel, Phil Collins, Tina Turner, Art of Noise, Rod Stewart, and LeAnn Rimes. After achieving a #1 hit with his band The Buggles with Video Killed the Radio Star, Trevor became a member of Yes before becoming the most important hitmaker of the 1980s and beyond. Awards followed. There were 4 Brits, a 1995 Grammy for Seal's Kiss from a Rose, a 2010 Ivor Novello for his outstanding contribution to British music, and a CBE. Following the publication of his best-selling memoir, Adventures in Modern Recording from ABC to t.A.T.u, Horn is here tonight. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage a bona fide legend of pop. It's Mr. Trevor Horn.
Good evening.
Hello, Sale. How is everyone? Good. I'm Danielle Perry. I'm from Absolute Radio, the American Music Prize for the other bits and bobs. What a dream assignment to be set to talk to Mr. Trevor Horn tonight and on this tour as well. So I think, there's so much to fit in tonight. We're going to do a big chunk on the 80s and there'll be a Q&A at the end as well. But shall we rewind to the first chapter, 1949?
Yeah, I was born in 1949 in Durham. So this is like the South to me, you know? It's funny when people say I come from North. Where? Manchester? Nah, it's the South, man. Durham, up in the Northeast, that's the North. So I was born in 1949. We lived next door to a dairy. My dad was looked after the dairy, he was like the maintenance engineer. Dairies get a lot of milk coming in and it goes off very quickly. So somebody's got to keep the fridges rolling. My dad used to play in the local dance band as well. That's how he met my mother. My dad was 33 and my mother was 20 when they got married. My mother was pretty hot. My dad had a car and he played in the dance band. I think that's what. But, my dad's family were all civil servants, whereas my mother's family were all miners. My grandfather on my mother's side was called Charlie Lampton, and he was a coal cutter. So I had quite an interesting upbringing. My father's family, I only ever saw one of them once. I think they disowned him after he married my mother. English man, England, never changes. Whereas my mother's family were all pretty rough at times, but they were really nice and they were really friendly. And then I had to, they told me when I was 4 I had to wear glasses. So I grew up in the Northeast wearing glasses, and I don't know if any of you read Viz. Well, there's a character called Biffa Bacon, and he's always beaten up on Sid Softy. And so I was a bit like Sid Softy.
And you say your dad was playing in the dance band, of course, so were there instruments lying around in the house? Did he show you how to play?
Yeah, there was, I was aware that my father played in the dance band from when I was about 3, because my mother took me down there to watch him. And there was a lot of music in the house, I guess. I never really thought much about it till I was about 8 or 9. And, we all were given recorders, and I took my recorder home and I came back on the Monday and I could play one of the pieces. it seemed pretty easy to me, but I don't think I was the only kid in the class who could do it. So I started to play the recorder a lot at school. And then when I was about 10 or 11, my dad showed me how to play the double bass. You might want to turn the monitors down just a bit. They're just on the verge of feeding back. Sorry about that. I spent my life in recording studios. So my dad showed me how to play the double bass on Way Down Upon the Swanee River, which is pretty simple. And then from about the age of 12, I used to occasionally dep for him because sometimes something would break down and Dad would say, you've got to go and play the first set for me. So I'd show up and I'd play the first set. I mean, much to the chagrin of all the other guys in the band, didn't like it much because I'm sure I wasn't very good. But we played stuff like, his band played things like Summit Ridge Drive or Let's Twist Again. Boom, 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 boom. I remember to this day, but one of the interesting things was also at the same time, I started playing double bass in the school orchestra. The problem was that nobody ever gave me any lessons, so I was really rubbish. The only thing that was good about me was that I was the only double bass player in the county of Durham, I think. That got me a long way.
And then with the double bass, and then it was the bass guitar as well, so that kind of changed things a little bit.
Yeah, Dad brought a Rossetti bass guitar home one night. I think many of you remember Rossetti, it was a sort of make. And he said, oh, this is a game changer. He said, this is now, you're either playing the right note or the wrong note. And there's nothing in between, because it's got frets. So, you see, before that, the double bass, it made a, and if you're probably aware of double basses, but they sort of make a kind of sound. So you can get away with murder, really. You can bluff away like mad. And I remember my dad saying, this is going to get rid of all the bluffers. And he was right. And I started to play it. What was sort of, even though I wasn't very good, I could actually read the charts for it because that's how I'd started out. And back in, we're talking about here 1963, 64, that was quite unusual. Most kids who played the bass guitar couldn't read music at all. And I'd worked it out myself. No one showed me. I never had any lessons. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, by the way. Anybody who's thinking about taking up music as a career, have lessons. It's much better, I had no lessons, but I could read the charts because they were pretty simple. Most bass charts back in the day with dance bands, either you went boom, 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 or you went boom, 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 boom. One of those two, so they were fairly easy to spot, And if it was in 6/8, it was 2 dotted crotchets. I remember the first time I saw the Gay Gordons where the bass goes dun, 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 6/8, 2 dotted crotchets. So I kind of grew up reading for the bass guitar. And by the time I was 15, I was in the senior youth orchestra. I mean, I was still crap, I could barely play.
And formative years, I know you're a big Bob Dylan fan, weren't you? And you had your first band, the Outer Limits, as well.
Yeah, you see, I wasn't really that interested in playing the bass guitar. My only interest was that occasionally Dad would get me a paying job and I'd get a $5 or something for playing the bass guitar. That's what I liked about it. But really, I wanted to be Bob Dylan or the Beatles, one of the two, like just about everybody in my generation. And so I taught myself to play the acoustic guitar and then the electric guitar. And I had a band called the Outer Limits. Most of our repertoire was Rolling Stones songs because the Rolling Stones always played really simple songs, There was only ever three or four chords in them. Whereas the Beatles were actually quite harmonically complex by comparison. So I used to, every evening, instead of watching the TV, I'd go into the back room and I'd play the guitar. And that was kind of what I did for 4 or 5 years.
And while you were, sort of learning and really gaining an interest in music, you were working jobs as well, right? You had a lot of jobs. that your parents wanted you to pursue. They wanted you to become an accountant, potentially, because you're good at maths. So what jobs were you doing around about that time?
The year that I sat my O-levels, when you're 15 to 16, my parents moved to Leicester and left me with my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather at the time, even though I didn't know it, so I was only 15, was dying of black lung, silicosis, coal dust on the lungs. And he was in the front room getting thinner and thinner. And my grandmother, God bless her, was a bit crazy and hated pop music, was convinced that Mick Jagger smelled terrible. She would go on about it every time he came on the TV. I bet he bloody smells awful. Look at him. And I said, we used to call her Mama. I said, Mama, I bet he doesn't. I think he has baths quite frequently. But she wouldn't believe me. And then one night while I was staying with her, I stayed there for a whole year. There was only one TV channel. Back then there was only the BBC. And one night they said, on the BBC after the 6 o'clock news, they said, we've got something really special tonight. A young man from America who's going to sing you a couple of songs. And Bob Dylan came on. I've tried to find this, on YouTube and everything, but I can't find it. But I know it happened, right? Because I saw a bit in a film. It's not like a faint memory. And he sang Times They Are Changing. And then he sang Mr. Tambourine Man. And Mr. Tambourine Man knocked me out. I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to go do that. Chase Mr. Tambourine Man down the beach. Really had an effect on me.
And like all amazing stories, when you see bits of the jigsaw coming together, there was a moment, wasn't there, when you were working at a rubber factory where there was a wonderful sort of chance, bit of fate that happened?
Yeah, well, you see, the thing was because of my obsession with the Beatles and everything, playing the guitar, I failed most of my O-levels. Even though I went to grammar school and I passed a lot of them in the mocks, living with my grandmother had kind of really, it was difficult to study. Not that I would have studied anyway. I can't blame her for it really. But when I came, I went off with the Durham County Senior Youth Orchestra, toured Germany, playing loads of places up and down the Rhine. And when I got back to hell because my GCSE results had come in and I'd only passed 2. My mother was furious with me. You're going to be in a council house for the rest of your life now. And, that's what they were afraid of. They got me a job at a chartered accountants, but I had to get 6 O-levels. Anyway, I ended up at the John Bull Rubber Company in the costing office. And whilst I was in the costing office, I was meant to be also doing another 4 O-levels, retaking them. But I never told my mother. After the first couple of weeks, I stopped going to the classes. The classes were in the evening. I used to go to the cinema every time. Well, my poor parents, I feel sympathy for them now when I think about it. And anyway, I was working in the costing office, costing rubber hoses that go in the engine, This little rubber hose this long. I had a slide rule and there's like thousands of things that you have to take into account to cost what it's going to cost to manufacture this little hose. I got booted off that fairly quickly because I was obviously hopeless at it because I never concentrated. And so I had this job that was kind of a ghost job where I just checked works order forms. And a guy sat behind me at a desk and one day, by this point I was also playing 3 or 4 nights a week in a semi-pro band called the Eric Upton Band. Incidentally, one night we played with The Who. We played at Leicester University, and we played dinner music and a little bit of music for dancing. And I read my music off Keith Moon's drums. And I remember it because he had purple drums. And when we came off stage, The Who were all backstage. And Roger Daltrey was the first guy I ever saw with dyed hair. I couldn't take my eyes off him. And he was really nice. He came up to me and said, "What's the audience like, mate?" And I said, "Oh, they're pretty good." I mean, the Who were absolutely brilliant, I have to say. Even the old sax players in the band thought they were good. Anyway, getting back to this guy who sat at the desk behind me, one day he said to me, there's a new guy moved into our village, a guy called Johnny Wollaston, and he has the pro band at the local top rank. And I told him about you. And I told him you read music and you played in this semi-pro band, and he wants to meet you. So I went down to meet this Johnny Wollaston guy, and he said, I want you to watch my band for an hour, and then we'll talk. So I watched his band, and it was a good band, you know, it was a professional band, and I was just a semi-pro. And one of the songs they played was a song by Love Affair called Everlasting Love. I don't know if any of you remember it.
Yeah.
But it was one of the first songs that those sort of bands had to play that had a really difficult bass part. That bass part didn't go boom, 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 it went I mean, it went like that nearly all the way through the song. And unless you played bass guitar with a pick, you wouldn't be able to play it. And I could tell his bass player was struggling with it. He was trying to play it with his fingers and it wasn't working. Anyways, Johnny Wilson, the guy, said to me, first thing he said to me after we watched his band was, can you play Everlasting Love? So I said, oh yeah. I'd never played it. I figured I could learn it if I had to. So he said, okay, give me your number and I'll keep you in mind. Anyway, a couple of months after that, I had an epiphany driving home at 2 o'clock in the morning on my scooter. And I woke my parents up and I said, I've decided I'm going into music. Of course, they weren't very happy because it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And my dad was like, you're nowhere near good enough. You're just playing with some little semi-pro band, you know. If you want to be a professional, you know, you've got to be much better than you are. I said, well, I'll get better. And they begged me to have one more job, you know, to try one more job. So I got a job as progress chaser in a plastic bag factory, which was in Leicester, which was kind of, I mean, it was hopeless because, you know, you get British Sugar Corporation on the phone saying, we ordered 50,000 bags from you and we haven't had them. They were meant to arrive last week. And I'd have to go down and talk to the head of production and say, I've got British Sugar Corporation on the phone and they're looking for 50,000 bags. When do you think you'll have them? And he'd say, fuck off. So I have to go back and say, should be there next week. Anyway, eventually I got caught out. They fired me. And I went home and my mother was surprised to see me because I think it was a Wednesday afternoon. What are you doing home? I said, I've been sacked. I mean, I've skipped a few jobs. I did get sacked from a few other jobs as well. But I've skipped through that one. I said, right, well, that's it, Mum. I'm not gonna go back into the normal world anymore. I'm going into music after this. And when my dad got home, he was like, but you're not good enough. I keep telling you, you're not good enough. I said, well, I'll get good enough. And he said, oh, I don't know. You're crazy. And what are you going to do when you get to 30 and 40, you know? You won't, it might not look so good then. Anyway, I said, I'm going to get the Melody Maker tomorrow. It comes out on Thursday. And I'm going to phone up a couple of jobs in the back. Anyway, I got up on the Thursday morning. Halfway through breakfast, there was a knock on the door. And I went to the door. And my goodness, totally out of the blue, because it had been 6 months earlier, was this guy, Johnny Wollaston. He said, oh, thank goodness you're in. And I didn't say I just got sacked yesterday. It was just one of those things, you know, I was there. He said, I want you to join my band. I've got a contract here. You've got to start in a month. And I was like, but you never heard me play. He said, oh, you'll be all right. Come on, sign the contract. I looked at the contract and it was 25 quid a week for 5 nights. I mean, I was doing 40 hours a week for a tenner, you know, at the plastic bag factory, and I'd get another 5 or 6 quid from doing 3 gigs with Eric Upton or 2 gigs. So 25 quid a week for 5 nights. And it meant, you know, you didn't have to get up and you could do what you wanted during the day. And anyway, I always used to play music in the evening, so it was suddenly like having no job. So that was my first pro gig.
What did your dad say when you told him?
My dad was shocked. I mean, he was genuinely shocked. And he made me practice. He said, you better get in there and practice every single day. And I did. For the next month, I went to the top rank and I used to sit in the band room and go through all the charts. And my first night, when I played with the band, I was terrified, you know, because I was only 18 and everybody else in the band was old. You see, all those old, some of you have a dim and distant memory of Mecca ballrooms and top rank suites. And the bands in them used to have to play a combination of you know, old stuff from the 50s and the new stuff, you know, like pop stuff. So it was an interesting thing. And because I could read, I could do it. But I remember the first night I screwed up the end of I've Got You Under My Skin. There's it finishes and there's a bass line that goes boom, 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 boom. And I just didn't play it. And everybody looked at me and I got a hard time. And I didn't realise, but I was the only person in the band that liked the band leader. I liked him because he'd given me a job. Everybody else hated him. In fact, the guitar player hated him so much, he had a doll of him he used to stick needles into. So, that was my first pro gig.
It's an amazing story though, isn't it, how it all comes together. Let's go now to the early 70s, and you relocated to London. That must have been a fascinating time to be in the capital.
Yeah, London was... It was amazing because it was the first time growing up in the Northeast, we'd never really met anybody exotic. So, you know, it was, I mean, who that's even remotely exotic would go up to the Northeast? It was a pretty grim place back then. So, you know, suddenly I was living in a bedsit in Earl's Court and there were all kinds of people there. I was playing with a band called Joseph's Colours, run by a guy called Johnny Joseph. And every month, my mother used to come down with a Sunday lunch in a pressure cooker. On the first floor of this bedsit was the local drug dealer, who you know, as chance would be, was black, right? But was also a lovely guy. And I used to tell my mother, Mum, you don't need to be frightened of him. He's a lovely fella. My mother would come up the stairs with the pressure cooker. I don't like you being here. It's not a nice place. I said, it's a lovely place, Mum. Everybody's really nice, you know. And London was like that. It was very diverse, but it was good, you know. It was very sort of friendly. That's what I was quite surprised by that.
And then, I mean, we have to move through stuff so quickly because there's so much to get through with Trevor's life to date. And then in Leicester, you went back to Leicester in the mid-70s, didn't you? And you helped build a recording studio.
Yeah, I went back to Leicester and I built a recording studio with another guy. I played 7 nights a week in a nightclub and I met all kinds of people because it was a Bailey's nightclub and, you know, everyone from Susie Quattro, Neil Sedaka, you know, Vince Hill, all kinds of people played there. And I was in the house band, so we had to back them. And we were 7 nights a week, no nights off. But it was really fun gig, and during the day I built a recording studio. And for some reason, you know, in London, I'd ended up with the best shit gig around, which was Ray McVeigh. Ray McVeigh used to do Come Down Sing, loads of radio broadcasts, all kinds of albums, and, you know, 5 or 6 gigs a week. But, I mean, it was hard work. The 5 or 6 gigs a week were every night was 2 1.5-hour sets of what we used to call the cavalcade of crap. Everything from Telstar to Michael Rollerboat Shaw. Yeah. And it certainly toughens you up. I mean, even to this day, I can still play octaves on a bass guitar forever, you know, because most things back then you were playing octaves, dunky, gunky, gunky, kind of stuff. But I saved up my money and I bought some recording gear, so me and another guy built this studio, and then of course we had no clients, because it's hard, you know, getting people into recording studios. The first real job we had was the Leicester City football team. We made a record with them. There's a guy called Ivan Slack wrote a song called This Is the Season for Leicester. This is the season for Leicester. This is the big one for us. We're doing great. Or something like that. It was a bit of a dog of a song, but, you know, what the hell. So I organised the band and recorded, you know, rearranged his song a bit, rewrote a couple of bits of it. And then, you know, I discovered pretty quickly that football players might be good football players, but man, they can't sing. They can't sing a note. So me and my buddies all became Leicester City football team, and we finished it off, and there it was. And it was sent to London. Decca pressed up 5,000 copies of it, and it came back. It had the Decca logo on it, and there it was, the first record I'd ever made. And a friend of mine who played with, I think he played with Geno Washington. He was a really good musician, this guy. He said, you know that job that you did on the Leicester City football team, that's called being a record producer. And I said, oh, that's what record producers do. I'd seen the credit, you know, like I knew George Martin produced the Beatles, but I didn't really understand what he did. But as soon as somebody said that to me, I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. I want to be a producer. And from that moment, I think it took me 5 years.
Amazing. And let's now talk about the Buggles, and let's talk about Tina Charles as well, because you were MD for Tina for a while, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I was Tina's boyfriend for a while, but that was a dangerous occupation because the boyfriend before me killed himself. And I survived, and I ended up as Tina's MD. And Tina was, you know, I made that joke about her, but Tina was actually, had a lot of really good qualities. She was always good to the band. She liked hanging with the band. So I was her MD for years, you know, for maybe 3 or 4. I went to Canada with her and a few other places. In the meanwhile, I was doing a lot of demos for people. I met this guy on Denmark Street who was Tina's publisher, and he took a liking to me, so whenever he signed anybody, he would give me them to produce. So I must have done 4 or 5 different acts for him. I mean, he would bollock me sometimes, you know, if he thought I'd done a bad job of it. Is this what you've wasted my money on? You know, he could be quite fearsome, but he was really nice to me. And I started producing all these songwriters. And I discovered fairly early on that I could rewrite their songs for them completely, and they didn't seem to notice. You know? And sometimes it would really surprise me that they wouldn't say anything about it, you know, how much their song had changed. So after doing this for a while, I suddenly thought, this is stupid. I stopped changing other people's songs. About time I wrote something. So I wrote a lyric for a song called Clean Clean. And I showed it to my friend Bruce, who was somebody a songwriter that I was working with and producing. And I really liked his voice. And he put a tune to it and sang it. And it was his song Clean Clean. It's on the first Buggles album. I thought, well, that's good. That's how you write songs. So Bruce and I started writing songs. And the third song we wrote was Video Killed the Radio Star. We had this line for ages that went, you know, I heard you on the wireless back in 52, and we couldn't think of a line to follow. If you think about it, it's not an easy line to follow. And then one Tuesday, after smoking a bit of ganja, I managed to come up with Lying Awake Intently Tuning In and You, and we wrote the whole song in an afternoon. And I remember it because there's a cassette from that afternoon where you know, Bruce's girlfriend, Tessa, arrived late afternoon, and I was sitting there, and Bruce had gone to the bathroom. And for some reason, Tessa had it in her head that Bruce and I were having a gay love affair, which, you know, believe me, wasn't happening. But she was convinced, and she was, finally, I've caught you. Because he came out in a dressing gown. She thought this was proof. But there's a cassette from that afternoon where you can hear Bruce singing the song, and then he says, what do you think of it, darling? And she said, it's all right, not much. But there it was. And at that particular point in time, Bruce and I started a group, and we were rehearsing. Some guy was paying for us to rehearse, but we weren't doing Video Killed the Radio Star. We had the song there, but we weren't doing it. And then this big producer came along, a guy called Mike Hurst, and signed Bruce to CBS Records. Came and looked at me and Jeffrey and said, "No, don't want them. Just sign Bruce," and left us kind of high and dry. And I said to Bruce, "Are you not going to do Video Killed the Radio Star then?" He said, No. I'm just going to do commercial songs." I said, "Well, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it." And just at that particular point in time, Tina said to me, "I want to invest some money in the music business." So I said, "Oh, I've got a project for you. And we've got this song, Bruce and I, and we want to record it." And she said, "Who's singing it?" "You're not singing it, you." Because Tina wasn't much of a fan of my voice, you know. Tina had a terrific voice. Tina's a really terrific natural singer. So I kind of obfuscated a bit. I kind of pretended Bruce was going to sing it, because she had a thing for Bruce at the time. So Tina played for the first session, and we did a demo of Video Killed the Radio Star. Tina was the original oh. She did it. She's not on the record because, for various reasons, mainly because we wouldn't sign a contract with her after it, and she got very cross with us. You know, the day that we did the demo of Video Killed the Radio Star it was almost like, out of 5 years of making records, it was the best session I'd ever had. You know, everything worked. And you know, you get a few of those in your life, but that was definitely one of them. And you know, I knew when I heard Jeffrey playing the synth on "They took the credit for your second symphony," I thought, this is the best thing we've ever done. This could do something, you know. I knew we had something. The interesting thing was, we took that demo, we played it to a few record labels, and they listened to it, and to me, it was so obviously a hit, right? You know, we had the radio speaker voice, everything on it. And guys listen to it, and then they go, "No, God, you must have 10 ears, man." Yeah? But we were definitely turned down by quite a few people. And then, you know, right at the last minute, just as this was around the time I met my late wife, because I played her Video Killed the Radio Star, and she loved it. And she was trying to sign us, but what she didn't know at the time was that I had no money, because I never made a thing about it, you know. But I was living from hand to mouth, as musicians generally tend to. In fact, I'd had to take some tough gig in Reading, playing with this band, you know, 5 nights a week just to pay the rent. And I used to have a cassette player, I used to record them, and I used to play it back to them in the band room saying, "You lot are real shit, listen to it. Listen to how bad you are." And they used to laugh. But anyway.
Well, let's remind ourselves. Let's hear a little bit now of Video Killed the Radio Star. Soundtrack so many of our lives, isn't it? Amazing things. And of course, a huge hit. So funny that he said, "No, I'm just going to go and do commercial music," and then it became the massive hit it was.
I know.
But also that leads us into the next chapter, because Buggles shared a manager with Yes, which leads us into this part of the story.
Yeah, Brian Lane. Me and my brother were such big fans of Yes in the 70s. We loved Yes, and I'd seen them once at De Montfort Hall in Leicester in 1975, and I was a big fan of John Anderson as well, because, you know, I had a voice, I didn't have any soul in my voice, you know, like, in fact, I had minus amounts of soul. And I'd never, you know, so I'd listen to singers and I couldn't possibly imitate them. The first singer I heard who I could do a passable imitation of was John Anderson. So, of course, I learned a few Yes songs. And I loved Chris Squire, because he played bass guitar like it was lead guitar. And I never heard of Yes till I went to I was living in Margate and playing with a band called the Canterbury Tales. And we went to a local pub and there was a band called Tristram Shandy. And they played this song, that started off, take a straight and stronger course to the corner of your life. And I was with the girl and I was saying to her, God, this is a really good song. Who wrote this? And she said, oh, it's not their song. This is a group called Yes. Have you never heard them? I said, no, but I love this song. And she said, oh, you'll like them. And I bought the Yes album. Of course, I wore it out, If you were a bass player, Starship Trooper was like a major thing, So I knew that if we had the same manager, I would end up meeting Chris Squire. I really wanted to meet him. And I got to meet him. And he was this incredibly tall guy who spoke very kind of slowly like that. But and at first I thought, oh my God, he's a bit thick. But then, as soon as I got to know him, I realised he was the exact opposite. He was very cunning. Anyway, he invited us down to his house. He had a faux mansion down in Virginia Water. He really liked Living in the Plastic Age, the title track of the album. And he played it a couple of times while we were down there, and he kept saying how much he liked the production on it. And then at a certain point of the evening, you've got to realise, I just sold 12 million records. That makes him a bit cocky. So I said, are you guys making another album? And he said, oh yeah, we just started. I said, do you need any songs? Because I've got a song that might suit you. He said, oh yeah. So he gave me a guitar and I played him this song called Fly For Me. And he said, you sound a bit like John Anderson, which was kind of a fateful thing. Anyway, I started to go down and watch them rehearse. Now, when you get really close up to your favourite band, I mean, it was just the three of them. Alan White, Chris Squire and Steve Howe. Rick Wakeman wasn't there. And every day I would say, is John coming in? Because I was thinking I'll have to show John the song. Also, part of me wondered if John would actually sing the song. Part of me couldn't quite believe it. And then, of course, they came clean. John had left. And so had Rick Wakeman. And they asked me and Jeffrey to join, which was bad because they had 3 nights sold out in Madison Square Gardens.
Which is quite a baptism of fire, isn't it? But then you did go, and I think, these were some of the biggest gigs you've ever played, right? And I think you went to see Chuck Berry the night before one of them, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to see Chuck Berry in a stadium. It held about 8,000 people. And we were starting the next night at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, which had a capacity of 15,000. And I said to the woman I was with, sorry, is this as big as the place that we're playing tomorrow night? She said, oh no, the place you're playing tomorrow night is twice the size of this place. God, I mean, I really felt like the condemned man. And the next night I had to go on stage in front of 14,000 people and sing with Yes. I mean, it was an extraordinary experience. They told me just before we went on that I had to do all the announcing. We were playing on a massive revolving stage. I was on a riser in the middle of it. And from the moment we started, the stage started revolving. It wasn't because there was a wonderful electric motor at the bottom of it. It was because there was 2 roadies on hands and knees pushing it round underneath the stage. And, I did 44 shows across America with Yes. Some of them were better than others because, of course, I had no real training as a singer. I was always the person. They'd always, especially, when I was playing with all those terrible dance bands, they would give me all the crappy songs to sing. Like with Ray McVeigh, I used to have to sing long-haired lover from Liverpool, and riding along on the pushback, honey. I did t.A.T.u, Silver Lining, all those kind of the crap was. So suddenly being John Anderson was a real strain, and I should have taken singing lessons. So I had a problem some nights,
And that led on, you recorded the album Drama, of course, didn't you?
Oh yeah, we did the album before we went out on the road. Yeah, that was quite an experience because I discovered why singers are so crazy, because they get so bored. When you're the singer, when you're the bass player, you play from beginning to end on just about every song. But when you're the singer, you have to wait and wait and wait while they mess around with this and fiddle with that. Haven't you got the track yet? When's it my turn? And then you get one go and woof, and that's it. So, that's why singers start to do crazy shit all the time, like they get up themselves a bit. But I kind of compensate for it by taking over as producer, because that's what I'd been doing anyway. And that was a really good experience because I'd never produced a band like Yes before. And I used to give them marks out of 10. I used to say, you've got to get 8 out of 10 before I'm accepted. And, they'd be like, wasn't that great? Only 7. I'd do it better than that.
Would you ever give out a 10?
No, never.
No. You then went on to marry music executive Jill Sinclair, who went on to manage you, very pivotal in your career as well. And then you started buying musical equipment, didn't you? One great big thing.
Yeah, I bought this thing called a Fairlight. I'd seen them because a couple of people had them. A Fairlight was it was a white box, metal box, with a screen. Came with a screen and a pad and a pen. You've got to realise this was the days, personal computers were only just starting to become even something you might see. A Fairlight cost £18,000, which is a lot of money, and it was even more money back then, because back then you could get a house for 18 grand. I remember my late wife saying, "Do you really need this? It's £18,000. But I was lucky, I'd made a lot of money from Video Killed the Radio Star, because, we'd sold 12 million copies of the thing. And, with singles, you don't get a lot, especially if you've spent a lot of money recording it, but we'd also written it. So I could afford to do it. And the Fairlight was a real game changer. It only had 8 seconds of sample time, and you could only use it in half-second bursts. But it meant that you could do stuff that people could never do before. And what was even better about it is that people didn't understand it. The first thing that I did that really knocked me out, I made a record with Dollar where Teresa Bazar had to sing La 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 La, and I sampled her into the Fairlight. And when I say I had a guy called JJ who literally lived with the Fairlight, and he spent every day working on it, And I used to pay him £100 a day for when he was in the studio. And because it was such a complicated piece of gear, I could never have made records and learned how to work it. But it gave me a bit of an edge, So even on things like Lexicon of Love, there's cash registers, there's all kinds of things that we played into it from the Fairlight.
And I copied a quote down here because I thought it was so interesting. It was referred to as the key architect of incorporating sampling into the language of pop. So it was this really amazing thing, like you said, it had that edge and really brought different sounds and textures, I suppose, and sort of diegesis to the records in a way.
Yeah, well, and the really good thing about it was that nobody knew what I was doing. They would be like, "How did you do that?" And I'm like, "Oh well." I wouldn't tell people, especially other record producers would sidle up to me and say, "How did you get that sound when it does that?" And I'd tell them some lie. I didn't want them to know. I mean, it was only for a couple of years and then Akai brought out the S900 that had like 20 seconds of sampling was really worked. I mean, the Fairlight didn't really work most of the time. You know, it was one of those things that hung on by its fingernails kind of thing.
It worked when it needed to, though.
Yeah.
We're already up to the break. Thank you so much. We're going to have a short break now, 20 minutes or so. There will be a Q&A at the end as well. So if you have any questions for Trevor, we'll get to those very soon. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Trevor Horn.
Thank you. You can all hit the bar.
Very quiet. Did everyone have a nice interval? Everyone refreshed? Let's welcome back to the stage Trevor Horn. Right, the 1980s, the big chunk. So we talked about the Fairlight. You had the second Buggles album as well, and you worked with Dollar, didn't you, on a string of 4 top 20 hits?
Well, what happened was, the Yes thing kind of fizzled out. Nobody said anything because they never do in the music business, but I knew it was over, as they say. And I guess Jeffrey suddenly didn't show up at the studio one day while we were making the second Buggles album, and then I discovered through reading the Melody Maker that he joined Asia. Which is fair enough, really. I don't blame him. Jeff really liked the rock thing. It's not that I didn't like it, but it didn't sort of grab me in the same sort of way as it grabbed him. And so suddenly I was on my own, and it was a funny feeling. But I remember at the time saying to my late wife, well, look, the one good thing about him going off is it means that you can manage me. Because she couldn't manage me when I had a partner, because you can't it's like Spinal Tap, You can't do that kind of thing. And she said, well, if I'm going to manage you, the first thing I want to say is, I think you should give up any idea of being an artist. You should go back to being a producer. She says, as an artist, you might do okay, but as a producer, I think you could be like one of the biggest producers in the world. And it's great when people say that kind of thing to you, gives you a bit of confidence. The first act that she got me to produce was an act called Dollar, if anybody remembers Dollar. Yeah. Which surprised me because, like I said to her, come on, I did 3 nights at Madison Square Gardens, went back to produce Dollar. And she said, well, what you do is you write a Buggles song and then Dollar will front it, I said, well, do they know? I mean, are they up for that? So I met them, and they were, surprisingly enough, just you write the song, and we'll do it. So I went back to see my old buddy Bruce Woolley, and one Tuesday afternoon, whilst discussing song lyrics, we wrote 2 songs, a song called Handheld in Black and White, and another one called Mirror Mirror. And I found that I was I was imagining this fantasy world that Dollar lived in, because they were both very small and very pretty. And I sort of imagined that they were in love with each other, because the reality of it was that they may have been at one point, but they certainly weren't anymore. It's often like that with acts, it's funny. So, I had this whole sort of thing for them, and I started to do these records. I did four singles with them, and all 4 were hits and really well received. It surprised me because, when I was in the Buggles, NME really gave me a good kicking, They called me all kinds of things. And even though you pretend it doesn't hurt you, of course it hurts you a bit, no matter what anybody says. Suddenly, the main hitman at the NME, a guy called Paul Morley, was saying the nicest things about the Dollar records and saying how great they were and everything. And I have to say, I really enjoyed doing them, and it sort of got better as it went along with them.
Which then also led you to ABC, didn't it, in that chapter?
Yeah, well, I think I was working on probably the last record, which was Videotech, I think. And my late wife, Jill, said, well, I've got the next act for you to produce. They're called ABC, and they're on Top of the Pops tonight. We watch them, you know. They've got this record out called Tears Are Not Enough. And I watched them. I didn't much like the record, to be honest. I didn't really know quite what to make of them, because it's amazing how, I mean, I was one generation older than them. And so what they were playing to me was like disco music. And I didn't mind disco music, but I hadn't sort of thought I wanted to be a disco, you know, sort of record producer. But she sent me down to meet them. And I thought I was meeting them to see if I wanted to work with them. What I didn't know was I was one of 14 producers that they met. But they had something that not a lot of groups have. It's called intelligence. They were bright. They were all really bright. They'd all been to university in Sheffield, and they used to go to this club, and they used to dance to Chic and, you know, all those, you know, big sort of dance records of the late 70s, early 80s, discotheques and the sexolettes. And that's what they were into. And they were really funny. They said to me, if you produce us, you'll be the most fashionable producer in the world, because we're the most fashionable group in the world. I was like, wow, great, I can get into that. And they had magazines. They were really into magazines. And they were showing me their magazines. And I was like, you're into magazines? So am I. Right? And I fished in my bag. And I had, I used to like subculture magazines, particularly like wrestling magazines and tattoo magazines, which is a funny thing because I don't have any tattoos, but I just found those sort of subculture, I mean wrestling, you know, when you read, you see, you know, the gatefold in the middle is some guy with a flamethrower sticking out of his underpants. It's extraordinary, you know, and they're talking about it like it was normal, you know. So they were impressed with my magazines, and I think that's how I got the job. And they had this song that they played me the first time I was there called "Shoot That Poison Arrow," and I really liked that song. I thought that it was much better than "Tears Are Not Enough." But they had this bit in the middle where they didn't know what to do with it, and they were talking about this bit. I was like, you know. I've learned over the years, well, I'd learned even then, to be careful about getting too mouthy with people you don't know very well, especially with bands, because you never know. You've got to find out where their tastes lie before you start having any bright ideas. And they came up with this idea that it could be somebody standing in a station talking to somebody. And I thought, wow, that's the kind of thing I come up with normally. Weird stuff like that, and where the guy says, I thought you loved me, but it seems you don't care. And she says, I care enough to say that I could never love you or something. And this bit, you know, in the middle, it was great. It turned out really well, because it had to have a drum fill at the end of it, I remember. And the guitar player, Mark White, we just had a normal, you know, the girl who was the receptionist at the studio, by the way, who said the bit in the middle, said, you know, I care enough to know I could never love you. And there was a drum fill, boom, 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 and he went into the rest of the song. He said that drum fill's a bit weak. And so, in order to show him that I could make it stronger, I got you know, it was the early days of electronic drums, and I had a set of Simmons drums, and I put them through a Marshall stack. So they were really deafening, and so it's almost like the girl says it to the guy and then his heart drops, you know, with the drum fill, and that track turned out great. The other thing that was really good about that track was Anne Dudley. I met Anne like a few years before. I was playing in a terrible band called Cold Water Morning in Wimbledon Tiffany's. It was one of those gigs you do to just to pay the rent. And I was mostly on automatic pilot. You you know, just getting through it. And one night this girl showed up and played the keyboards, and she was twice as good as the normal keyboard player. I mean, she was bold and she sight read all the parts really. And I remember after the first set, I was so enthusiastic. I went up to her and I said, "Man, you're really good. You really are good." And, you know, I'd never played with a woman playing the keyboards. She was the first one. I said, "Do you ever do any sessions?" And she said that she'd done a couple of sessions for play school. Which she was sort of a bit hesitant telling me. But I said, "I'm going to be a record producer, and I'm going to get you to play on one of my records." But I could see on her face that she thought I was just coming it, you know. But when Jeffrey left, I tried a couple of piano players and keyboard players, and then I remembered Anne, and I started to use Anne. And Anne got really good, you know. At first she was a little bit shy and a bit scared, but as we worked, she just got better and better, and she was brilliant on that ABC album.
And that was The Lexicon of Love, wasn't it?
That was The Lexicon of Love, yeah.
1982, it was one of the biggest selling albums of the year and a Brit Award for British Producer of the Year as well, so that was a real moment too.
Yeah. Well, there was a funny moment when we were making Lexicon of Love when for some reason the guys in ABC hated Spandau Ballet. At least they did at the time. They were always going on about Spandau Ballet. Round about that time, I took like 4 or 5 days off from their record to remix the Spandau Ballet track, because I liked Spandau Ballet. I had a soft spot for them, you know. I really liked Chant Number 1. And they made this album, it really, their second album, it really wasn't very good. And they asked me if there was a track on there that I could fix up for them. So I fixed up this track called Instinction. And it got them a hit, and it sort of got them out of a bad... Their next album was great, so they didn't have a problem. Anyway, ABC were well pissed off with me for wearing Spandau Ballet. And they douche at me sometimes about it, you know. One night, we were working on their record, and they weren't there. And JJ had a sample of a heavy metal guitar in the Fairlight. And he tried playing it on one of the tracks, I can't remember, I think it was Date Stamped. It didn't work, but it really didn't work. And those are the days when something didn't work, you wiped it. So they said, "Shall we wipe it?" And I was like, "No, what? Leave it there, leave it there." So the next day, the ABC guys come in and play back Date Stamp was this guitar. And they were like, "What the hell's that guitar? There's a guitar there." I said, "Oh, yeah. Gary Kemp was down last night." And he fancied playing guitar on this, so I said, "Yeah, the guys won't mind." And they were like, "I can't believe it, that Gary Kemp hear our record, never mind play on it." Because in the end, I had to tell them the truth, it was a wind-up, you know.
Now, in the same year, you and your partner Jill started your own publishing company, Perfect Songs, and there was an interesting project with Malcolm McLaren as well, which we should mention.
Yeah. I had a choice of a few people to work with, but most of the people wanted me to do another Lexicon of Love, and I really didn't want to do that again, you know, because the people that wanted me to do it, they didn't have such good material. The material with ABC was just great. And none of my contemporaries liked Lexicon of Love. They all thought it was just disco music, you know. I know that sounds funny now, but that's the way it can be. Malcolm McLaren was really interesting. You know, I think my late wife wanted to tell him off for punk rock because she'd been a maths teacher and she'd had to deal with punks, you know. Malcolm was just a really interesting guy. When he got talking, you know, you could listen to him for hours, and he played me all kinds of music, and he told me all kinds of interesting things I didn't know. Like, for instance, that all the black kids in New York were really into Depeche Mode. I was like, what? But he said, yeah. And then he played me, you know, Grandmaster Flash, Around the Wheels of Steel, and Planet Rock, which had used a sample from, you know, from Kraftwerk. There was a whole scene on the go in New York, and scratching, you know. When he explained scratching to me, it seemed like the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. But when you actually heard it, it was amazing. It was reminded me of the Fairline. So I signed on to do his record, you know, and we ended up we were in South Africa 2 years before Paul Simon went there, and we were using a lot of the same music, except Paul Simon had Paul Simon, and I only had Malcolm. So even so, we managed to get a few hits, you know, Double Dutch and Living on the Road to Soweto. But the big hit for Malcolm's album was Buffalo Girls, which was like the first ever British rapping scratching record. And it was the world's famous Supreme team. They were two guys who had a radio show that went out at 4 o'clock in the morning in New York. And when I first met them, they looked at me like I just crawled from under a stone. When I said to them, I really like your radio program. They're like, really? And we flew them over here. And I remember I showed them the Fairlight, and they didn't get that at all. They just didn't get it. And I said to them, what's your favourite beat? So it took us about 4 hours, but I had a drum machine in DMX. And finally I managed to get this beat out of them that sort of went doo-doo, 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 doo-doo. And they really liked the drum machine. And I had loads of acetates of stuff that I'd done with Malcolm, you know, the Zulu women. You know, when we were in the studio in Johannesburg, we'd been working nights. That's the only time I could get studio time. We did like 20 nights in a row. And I had 17 or 18 assorted Zulus and Xhosas. And part of the troupe were 3 ladies who sang, and they had the most amazing voices, and they were really funny. And I don't know if I should tell this story, but there was
I'm nervous.
Malcolm had never sung at this point, but I had a feeling he might not be very good. And I said to him, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, we had this song called Tina, and it sort of went, you know, Tina says you can dress her, she loves you, she loves to jive, my baby. It went something like that. I said to Malcolm, it's time for you to sing. Come on, we've got to get on with it. Everybody was asleep. You know, all the Zulus, everyone was asleep. So now's a good time. And if I could give you an idea of what this was like. So Malcolm went out into the studio, and I said to him, you know, down the talkback, Malcolm, he went like this. I was on his headphones. I said, Malcolm, you come in after 8 bars. And he went, what's the bar? And I said, well, okay. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a sign when you come in, right? So he stood at the mic. And he was funny, you know, he had this Buffalo Girls hat on. And so it was the intro of the song. And then I went, Mark went, Tina says you can just shut your jive, my baby. And everybody woke up in the studio. And Gary Langan, my old engineer's got a tape where you can hear me say, I say, my God, he sounds like Jimmy Clitheroe on acid. And one of these little Zulu ladies said to me, Trevor, Malcolm can't sing. And I said, well, that's my problem, I'll do it. So after he had this go at the vocal, I mean, I didn't know what to say. I said, Malcolm, it's got a tune. It kind of goes like this. Tina says you can trust her. And whatever. And Malcolm said, you want me to sing it like that, like you just sang it? And I said, well, no, not exactly, but that's the tune. He said, I can't sing like that. He said, I'm a feel man. I just feel it. He said, I'm a wacky kind of guy. So whatever comes out, that's what you've got to deal with. So that is what I had to deal with. But having said that, it was really good fun. And we got a hit out of it, you know, Buffalo Girls.
Absolutely. And, you know, with the added addition of like the scratching and all the sort of stuff that you were using at that time, you had one of the first ever British hip hop singles as well with Buffalo Girls.
Yeah, it was literally the first one. I know because the guy, Richard, what's his name, that runs that record label that has what's her name now? The really good girl singer. Chasing Pavements.
Adele.
Adele. He came around one night and said, "Do you realise that you made the first ever?" I was like, "Yeah, I do." But, so what? What difference does it make? It's like I was, but like Video Killed the Radio Star was the first track on MTV, but you're part of history, but you don't get any money for it. It's funny. But when I finished Buffalo Girls, I left this bit on at the end where one of the girls says, "Too much Snow White," meaning it came from something that happened on the World's Famous Supreme Team show, where the World's Famous Supreme Team say, "Jessalina, how come you're up so late?" And she says, "Too much Snow White," meaning she did too much blow, basically. And I left that on the end of the record, and I heard it when it was played on Radio 1 lots of times, and I was terrified. I thought sooner or later somebody's going to suss where that is, and I'm going to be in trouble. And one day when I was at Psalm East, the phone rang, and the assistant came around to get me. He said, "It's the controller of Radio 1 on the phone." I thought, fuck, they found out. I'm in for it now. And I picked up the phone, and of course he was just going to tell me I won the DJ's award. So no one ever caught on to it.
You just mentioned Psalm, but in 1983 you then buy a studio and you form a record label, Z.T.u. Now, Trevor mentioned Paul Morley earlier on on the show, and he was a journalist with the NME, and you teamed up with your partner Jill Sinclair and Paul to create this record label. And if you look on YouTube, there's some amazing old footage of them all sat around the table answering the phones, sorting out marketing plans and all sorts, but a great chapter.
It was one of those things, you build an empire and then the empire strikes back. We had an amazing 2 years, and then it wasn't very easy after that. You see, the problem was that our record label went through Island Records because what happened was Chris Blackwell had this recording studio. It was called, at the time, Basing Street Studios. And I had dinner with him, with my late wife. And at some point during the dinner, I said to him, "What are you doing with Basing Street Studios?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just about to sell it to Richard Branson." He said, "Why, do you want it?" And I was like, "Yes." And my late wife kicked me under the table, get me to shut off. She didn't want me to look too eager. But the fact was that, her family had, when I met her, she had a recording studio. Psalm, it was just called Psalm at the time. And we later called it Psalm East because it was Psalm East and Psalm West, which was the old Basing Street. But, and it got to a point where I couldn't get into Psalm anymore. It was my favourite studio, but I couldn't get in because there was so much, because I was having hits from it after ABC and Malcolm and everything, everybody wanted to book the place. So I was like a wandering minstrel, I was going everywhere. And so the idea of getting a much bigger place with lots of rooms in it really appealed to me. So we literally did a deal on the back of a fag packet, one of those kind of things. And within like 3 weeks, we bought all of the equipment in the old Basing Street Studios, and we bought it and we rebranded it. We also completely redecorated it, and we'd been in LA for a while, and we'd seen a lot of wooden buildings with this stained wood, and a lot of it was stained blue, and we loved the look of stained blue wood. So when it came to decorating the studio, we decided we were going to have a blue studio. We were the first blue studio in the world. And I remember the workmen were like, and the engineers were horrified. The deputation came to me, "Do you know what your wife's doing? She's going to paint the place blue." I was like, "Yeah, I know. But blue, you can't do that. Recording studios were all boring. They were brown, So we were the first blue studio. We borrowed £1 million from the bank and did it all up. I mean, there's an interview with me from that era where I say we borrowed £1 million and I look really worried. I was worried.
But it all worked out because you signed Frankie Goes to Hollywood to Z.T.u.
Yeah, they were. The first thing we released was Art of Noise. See, Paul Morley had been horrible about me when I was in the Buggles. But then he really loved Donna and he liked ABC. So suddenly I was like the darling of the NME. It was only for a brief period of time, but it was a heady experience. And so when we were starting this record label, I'd said to Jill, I want to try this guy, this journalist, because he's so clever that I think he'll be good for the record label. And so we hired Paul to run the record label. I mean, he was a bit of a handful. I mean, all the stuff that was on Relax, they got it banned, was stuff that he put on, apparently without telling us. Lick the shit off my boots or something like that. Yeah, I would never have put that on in a million years. I had kids by that point. But Paul, I mean, the Welcome to the Pleasure Dome album, the initial sleeve had depicted 35 different sex acts between animals. and we grabbed it just before it went off to the printers. And it's a good job we did because we've had to scrap it. We made him put fig leaves over everything. So Paul was that kind of guy, you had to really keep your eye on him. But he was very stimulating. He came up with the name The Art of Noise, and he wrote the manifesto for The Art of Noise. And then with the Frankies, like I said, he wrote all the stuff on the label, and that's what got Relax banned, and that really put us through the roof, really, from a sales point of view.
Absolutely. We can listen to Relax right now. We've got some audio, please, Alice.
Relax, come to rest when you want to go to rest. Relax, come to rest when you want to come. Relax, come to rest when you want to sit to rest. Relax, come to rest when you want to come.
Absolutely huge. Stayed on the UK singles chart for a year, and Two Tribes, it sold millions of copies. What was it, do you think, about that album and the sound of Frankie that really connected?
Well, I remember when what's its name, when Two Tribes came out on a Thursday, I think, and I read the review. It was a really good review of it in the NME, and I thought I'll go down to the local art price and see if I can buy a copy of it. And I was at the time. My mother-in-law had a flat in Sandbags, and we were staying in Sandbags near Bournemouth, and there was a shopping mall in Poole, and there was an Our Price Records in there. And as I went into the shopping mall, I heard Two Tribes blasting out, and I went straight into the record shop, and it was packed, and there were loads of people, and they were all buying Frankie stuff. They were buying, there was 2 or 3 mixes of Relax. And they had the 12-inch and the cassette of Two Tribes. The only time in my life I've ever seen that many people buying records. So I picked up a copy of it and I went to the counter. And when I gave the guy my credit card, he went, "Is it you?" Yeah. He said, "God, look at it. Look how many I'm selling." He said, I was just on the phone. I've ordered another 4,000 copies of it. He said, all I have to do is play it and everybody's buying it. So it was. I won't tell you how long I spent on Two Tribes. Me and Steve Lipson, we scrapped it. I mean, we spent long enough on Relax, but then we spent even longer on Two Tribes. And, we did all that stuff with, Paul had got a tape of, local radio stations have a disc that if there's an atomic attack, like a nuclear attack, this was the disc that they had to play. And we got lots of the stuff from it. And we found the guy, Patrick, I can't remember his second name, Patrick somebody or other, who did the voiceover. We hired him. I remember we paid him £1,000. And he came down and reset it, and we used it on the 12 inches. And it was a very exciting time,
I mean, do you remember all those T-shirts, like Frankie Says Relax, and everyone had one? It was such a cultural impact, that album. And from that, I mean, again, we're against the clock because there's so much we can discuss. You've got the second Yes album and Only of a Lonely Heart, but also, should we mention Grace Jones quickly, working with Grace?
Oh, Grace, yeah. Well, that was... Bruce had written a song called Slave to the Rhythm, and we tried it with the Frankies because after Relax, we looked through all their catalogue and we didn't think there was a second single. Eventually we had to do, the most potential was the one that had the most potential was Two Tribes, but not the way that the Frankies played it. We had to completely rethink it. But at a certain point, Holly actually sang Slave to the Rhythm. But the rock version, the one that sort of went doo-doo-doo-doo, slave to the rhythm, ba ba ba. And Chris Blackwell had a Grace Jones greatest hits coming out, and he said, "Would you do that track with Grace?" So I really liked Grace. I mean, I loved Warm Leatherette and My Jamaican Guy, La Vie en Rose. I really thought she was something else. And she came in and she sang on this particular version of Slave to the Rhythm, and it was good. She was nice. She was good fun. She marched up and down the studio. She was nowhere near as big as I thought she was going to be. But she was good fun. She was quite warm and funny. Anyway, the only problem was when I listened to it afterwards, I thought, this is crap. I don't like it. I'm going to do one track with Grace Jones, and it's going to go on this greatest hits album, and if it's this, it won't do anything, especially since the other ones are so good. So I thought, the title's great, but the song isn't right. And then I thought, which rhythm would I be prepared to be a slave to? And at the time, the only rhythm I really liked was go-go. And go-go was it was a scene that was happening in Washington. And there were two or three big bands, t.A.T.u, Experience Unlimited, and Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers. And I thought, I'm going to do a go-go version of Slave to the Rhythm. And looking back on it, I must have been mad, because it was so unlike the rhythm that we'd originally used. Anyway, Chris Blackwell indulged me, and he got me a rhythm section together. There was a couple of the guys from t.A.T.u, and a couple of guys from Chuck Brown. There was only one problem. I had them all in the studio. They couldn't play an arrangement. For them, an arrangement of a song was you started, you finished. You know what I mean? And in between you played something. They weren't quite sure what it was, but the idea of showing them chords and bits and odd bars, forget it. But whilst they were setting up, the drummer, while we were getting the drum sound, the drummer had played this beat for about 20 seconds. And I had it on my Walkman. Back then you had a cassette Walkman. And I kept playing it. And I was playing it to Steve, because I was working with Steve Limpson at the time, saying, this is the beat, it's so good, this beat. Can't we make a loop out of this or something? Because by this point, I'd kind of given up trying to get them to play anything, And Bruce, listening to it, because we'd taken him to New York with us, came up with those chords at the start of Slave to the Rhythm, which are beautiful, with the fifths on them. It sounded fabulous, and so we started to redo it completely from the ground upwards. And I had to phone Grace up and say, Grace, we've changed the track, so you need to come in and sing it again. She said, I can't come in at the moment. I've just set fire to Dolph's clothes. I remember that. At the time, her boyfriend was a guy called Dolph Lundgren. And anyway, when I got Grace's book, I discovered that, in fact, she was only about half a mile away. But she told me that she was in Los Angeles. We were in New York. So we put this track together where we literally looped a couple of bars of, the guy was called Juju, the drummer of his drums. But we made it was unusual because we made a multi-track loop. It wasn't just like most loops are just stereo drums. This was a multi-track across 10 tracks with all the different microphones. We did it using 2 digital machines. It took us 2 days because we had to literally do it bar by bar. And then we did a lot of the overdubs on it, but we still didn't have a vocal. And finally, Grace showed up. And, you know, we were nervous. I mean, we were spending money like it was going out of fashion, you know. So I didn't quite know if it was going to work. And she heard it, and I remember the first thing she said was, "It's been a long day, I've been working hard all day." And she sat down in a chair and I had the mic on her. And she said, "Roll the track." And Bruce stood about 4 feet away from her and went, you know, "Work all day, work all day, as men who know." And she sang it. And if you listen to the multi-track, you can hear Bruce in the background whispering the lines to her. But if you'd have been there, you'd have seen me and Lipson, who's a pretty undemonstrative kind of character, literally dancing the waltz in the control room with ecstasy. We were so pleased that it was actually going to work. And that's how it came about, really, I suppose. Then we got carried away and we did 5 versions of it, you know, made it into a whole album.
And throughout this talk tonight, I think you can see so much sort of gut instinct from Trevor and sort of vision. And between yourself and your late wife, Jill Sinclair, she, you know, put you in with ABC and Dollar in the early days, but then also she was on the mission to find the next Nat King Cole, and she really wanted you to meet a certain artist called Seal.
Yeah, she said, I think I found the next Nat King Cole. And she played me this demo of a track called Crazy. And Seal was singing on it, but his voice was through a phaser, you know, like a phaser pedal. And I said to her, I can't tell if he's the next Nat King Cole, because Nat King Cole never sang through a phaser, you know. He's singing through a phaser. I can't tell if he's got a good voice. And she was really cross with me, you know, like, my late wife could get really cross with you, you know. So she said, "You've got to meet him." I saw him across the room. And those were the days when Seal was wearing Cuban heel boots and he had dreadies up here. And he's 6'5" in his stocking feet. So with the dreadies and the boots, he was nearly 7 feet tall. I said to her, you know, I'm only 5'7". I said, do you think we'll have anything in common? And she said, "Oh, you're going to love him." I was like, really? But the funny thing was, I did, because when I finally met him, because she sent him over to meet me, at this point in time, he actually had he'd sung on his buddy's record with a song called The Killer. And it was such a good song that I was starting to get, you know, like, this guy's pretty good. He came in and I was in Studio 4 in Seoul mixing a Tori Reid track. And the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, this guy's got a great voice." And I thought, that's a good sign, because artists can be very jealous of each other. They can make catty remarks about each other. And I thought the fact that he was generous about Tori Reid showed that he was quite secure in himself. And we started talking, and of course, he was really the first African man I ever met. So I met loads of Jamaican guys, because they all used to come into the studio. I discovered then that African men were quite different. Seal had an accent, like the most beautiful accent, and still to this day has the best manners of just about anybody I know, just manners, you know what I mean? The way he treats people. He's really considerate and thoughtful, you know? And I mean, you couldn't say that about Yes. I mean, they were great, but they certainly weren't considerate and thoughtful. So, you know, he said to me, "I've just written this song, I want you to hear it. Is there anywhere I can play you this cassette? I've got a backing track on it." So he went downstairs to the coffee room. Psalm West had a coffee room, you know, where they did copies of things. Obviously, called the coffee room. But it meant it had like 4 cassette players, 2 or 3 DAT players, reel to reel. And he put this DAT on and this backing track started up, this beautiful synth. And then Seal started singing, "Ooh, I watch you comb your hair in different light." A track called Violet, which is the last track on the first album. And when I heard him sing that, you know, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I mean, I got a total musical hard-on for him immediately, you know. I couldn't wait to get him in front of a microphone. And he could see that he got me, you know, because he started singing. Seal did the most amazing impersonation of Sly Stone. You know, he could sound exactly like him. Anyway, I still didn't get to produce Crazy because part of the deal was that he was going to work with this other guy, a guy called Guy Sigsworth. And, but I was hovering. I was waiting. And my late wife, about 6 weeks after we signed him, she said, "You better go down and see how Crazy's coming along, you know." So I went to the studio where they were working, him and Guy Sigsworth. And Seal was looking huge and clomping around in a pair of great big boots. And I could tell straight away he was bored out of his tinies, you know. He was so bored. And the track sounded okay, but it hadn't really progressed very much. So I said, "Why don't you bring the multi-track over to our studio tomorrow and put it up in Studio One? Let's have a listen to it in there." And I could see Guy Sigsworth looking at me like deeply suspicious that I was trying to wrest Seal from him. Anyway, they showed up the next day and I put the multi-track up. And you know, the bare bones of the track were there. But I did something I hadn't done in a long time. You know, when I started out, I used to sit at the desk and I used to push the faders. But as you get older, you stop doing that. You hire people to do it. Just because I do, you know, it's better. And but this time with Seal there, I actually sat down at the desk. And in Crazy, Seal sings low, you know, "Man decides after 70 years" in the verse. And then he jumps up the octave, "But we're never gonna survive" on the chorus. So I put the track really loud on our big monitors. And when he was down low, I had his voice bone dry and I pushed his voice up loud so it was kind of in your face. And then the minute he jumped up the octave, I pulled it back a bit and put some reverb on him. And Seal had never seen anybody do that kind of thing before. And I could tell that I'd got him with it, you know. But still, we had even one more producer who was really, I've forgotten his name, but he used to produce, I'm getting old, Tim Simmons, that was his name. Really good producer, nice kid too. He came up with the big drum thing in the middle. But neither of them could finish it, neither of them could do it. So I ended up in America with 180 tracks of Crazy. And I flew Seal out, and I'll never forget it. And by the time, it was the first time Seal had ever been to America. And I decided that we were gonna do a Janet Jackson type version of Crazy. And I'll never forget, I played it to Seal. And Seal said, "Trev, look at me." And I looked at him. He said, look at me move." He said, "Do you think I can move to that? I'm way too big." He said, "That's no good." I said, "God, you know, you're right. I never thought of that." And then 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and I went to the door and opened it, and there was one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. And she said, "Is Henry here?" And I said, "Seal? Yeah." And Seal went off, and we didn't see him for the next 2 days. But we completely remade the track, we slowed it down or whatever. And it came out great in the end.
It was a long working relationship you had with Seal, wasn't it?
6 albums.
Yeah. And I think if we skip a track, Alice, we can just dip into "Kiss from a Rose", if that's all right. 3 Grammy Awards for that one, including Record of the Year as well. So amazing.
It's interesting, that extract, because Sim and I both liked French horns, and we both liked oboes. And that bit, you can hear the French horns quite clearly, and the oboe. Ba-da-da-da. Yeah, that was that. You know, when I said about Video Killed the Radio Star being one of the best sessions ever, well, I think one of the other, you know, the top 5 great sessions was when Seal did the backing vocals on that track. Kiss from a Rose was one of the best sessions as well. Did them all one Tuesday afternoon. He came in and he said, I've got them all in my head, so we'll do it quickly. And we did them really fast. And it just got better and better, you know?
Amazing. You'd love to be in a fly on the wall. That's all we've got time for before the Q&A, but all the stories are in the book. So if you want more detail on all of that, we could talk for hours, can't we, about everything. And every night I hear something I've never heard before, which is brilliant on this tour. So if we could get the house lights, that would be really kind. And then if you have any questions for Trevor, if you want to shout them out, I'll pick some people from the crowd. First person up with your hand up there for question time.
Musically, if you had a time machine, go backwards and forwards, what would you do? Just musically.
You mean if I could go back and see people?
Yeah, just like, obviously, you know, the greatest voices, the greatest music in time.
Would you
go backwards or forwards?
Well, I'd like to, obviously, going forwards, I wouldn't know what I was going to get. But it would probably not be as good. But if I could go back, I can tell you where I go to straight away. I'd love to go and see, go to Paris when they first played Afternoon of a Faun by Debussy. I'd love to have been there. I'd love to have seen Bing Crosby singing with the Paul Whiteman Orchestra in 1928, High Water. I'd love to have been there when they played that. I'd love to have seen Frank Sinatra live in his heyday with the Tommy Dorsey Band. I never saw the Beatles live. I would love to have seen the Beatles, so I would go back without a doubt, you know.
Okay, second row back, the gentleman in blue.
Hi Trevor. If you could choose a record out of all time and say you wish you'd have written that record, what would it have been and why?
Do you know, there's lots of tracks that you hear that you kind of wish, God, I wish I'd have done that one. It's so good. The last record that got me like that was Uptown Funk. When I heard Uptown Funk, I thought, I wish I'd done that one. That's really good, you know? And in a way, I knew where he nicked it all from. You know, it was all like, you know, the dance records like Earth, Wind and Fire, and that sort of soul thing that was happening in the 70s. So, yeah, Uptown Funk, if that answers the question.
All right, any more? Any more questions? The gentleman down the front here.
Is it true there was 3 different recordings of 2 Tribes and the band never played on the final recording?
I'm just thinking. No, the band didn't play on Relax or 2 Tribes. They sung on both of them. But then, you know, we were using, it's part of what made it so, it would have been, I say in the book that one of the things I regret was that when we had Relax finished, I could have put the band on it so easily, and I should have done. It was just I was worn out, and I had to go and start something else. And so I didn't have much time, but, you know, 4 on the Floor was not that difficult to play. You know, and the band could have played on Relax, and to some degree they could have played on 2 Tribes. What I did was, with both of them, with 2 Tribes especially, I got them to play it first, and then I sort of took their recording of it apart and programmed it all. And then Steve Lipson came up with that guitar part, you know, the signature guitar part on 2 Tribes. So, and then the band played on everything else after that. They played on The Power of Love and whatever. It was expediency more than anything. It was, you know, they were going around the world promoting Relax while we were working on 2 Tribes. You know, Elvis Costello came to the studio, recorded an album, went off, mastered the album, came back again to record a couple of B-sides, and I never forget he said to me, "I can't believe you're still on Two Tribes." And I said, "I am." Yeah, well, there you go.
Is there any at the back? There's somebody right at the back. Do you have glasses on your head? I can't quite see. Sorry, yes, you.
It's a two-pronged question, really. First of all, in the video, the Radio Star video, there was a very young Hans Zimmer.
Yeah.
I just wondered how he came to be in the band. And secondly, do you have any brief recollections about recording Do They Know It's Christmas in their songs around that media friend? Thank you.
Okay, well, yeah, how did Hans come to be in the band? Somebody asked me this question the other day. Somebody, a German person who was interviewing me, said, and then Genius came along. And I was like, what? Genius? And they said, Hans Zimmer joined your band. And I was like, oh, Hans, right? Sorry, well, Hans wasn't a genius back then. He was just a guy with a Prophet 5. And we used to hire the Prophet 5, so it came with Hans. And we liked Hans so much, because, you know, Hans, if you meet him in the flesh, is one of the most charming people you could ever meet. He really is very, very good fun and very, very nice. And so we had him in the band. We got him to join the band, but then it didn't really work out because Hans was he was like a composer, piano player, where Jeffrey was a bit of a maestro on the piano. So Hans didn't really get a look in. I think the thing, he did play on Video Killed the Radio Star. Da 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 boom boom. That's Hans playing a synth with a snare drum sound in it. So he did play that a bit. But, you know, we were very fond of him. And, you know, I wrote him a letter for when he went on the road for his program, where I said, you know, Hans, isn't it time you owned up that this film music's going nowhere? You know? But we'll have you back in the Buggles. Now, the other question was Live Aid, or Band Aid. Band Aid used our studio. I didn't initially go there because it was Bob Geldorf, and at the time I didn't like him very much because he was really rude to me. And, you know, some people were really, you know, when you first have a hit, some people are nice to you and other people are horrible because, you know, you sort of got through the door and you're there with all the successful people. Like, for instance, Brian Ferry was really nice to me at a TV show in Germany. Came over, introduced himself, said how much he liked the record Video Killed the Radio Star. Whereas Bob Geldof said, I preferred Bruce Woolley's version of it. Which, you know, I mean, that was one of the first things Bob said to me. And I don't know, you know, that's not my way. I always think that it's much better to be nice to people, even if, you know, you think of one thing that you like that they've done, it's going to make them... Anyway, he got my wife to let them have the studio for a day to record this song with him and Midge Ure. And my late wife went down and she called me up. She said, get your ass down here right now. This is all happening here. You won't believe there's just about everybody from the music business is down here. So I jumped in the car and drove down to the studios. And it's the only time in my life where when I got to the door, there was some big guy who said, sorry mate, you can't get in here. And I said, oh yes I can, I own the building. That's the only time I've ever said anything like that. And there they all were. And you know, the amazing thing is they made a film, I don't know if you saw it on TV, where it was like a doco of the day when they made the record. And that was the weirdest thing, seeing yourself 40 years ago. Like, stuff I'd never seen before. You know, Jill introducing me to Bono. Because I said to her, God, that kid with the stovepipe hat on, he's got an amazing voice, who is he? And she said, oh, he's the singer in U2. But it was an amazing day. And halfway through the afternoon, Bob got hold of me and said, come on, Horn, you do the 12-inch for us. So I was like, well, okay. So I did the 12-inch. I got the tape at like 7 o'clock the next morning, and I had to make up some kind of 12-inch of it, you know. But it was I tried to get them to sing a roundelay, and I think it's on the video that came out at the time. It was hopeless. You know where, what do they know? What is it? Feed the world, let them know let them know. And like as a roundelay, like you do Frere Jacques. But it didn't work. And I was kind of embarrassed by that. So it was an interesting experience. And I did the 40th anniversary. Bob phoned me up out of the blue. I want one of your fucking megabixes. Can you still do them? But I mean, I got quite friendly with Bob over the years. Although I always had to be very careful what I said to him. Because I remember bumping into him one time in Camden at some gig somewhere and making the mistake of saying to him, when are you going out with the Boomtown Rats again? And him going, I've been fucking solo for years, and what do you ask me? I'm fucking Boomtown Rats. I'm sorry. But he's great. He's a funny guy. At least you know what he's thinking.
That's true, that's true. Very quickly before we round up tonight, what are you up to now? I know you've just finished an album, haven't you?
Yeah, I just finished recording Block Party's new album. So, you know, if you're into Block Party, it'll be coming out next year. And I've done a couple of tracks with The Cause as well. Because I like Irish bands. I've done a few Irish things in my time. Even Shane MacGowan once.
So watch this space. We've come to a close. Trevor will be outside after the show signing books if you want to get yourself a copy of the book. But for now, Trevor, thank you for the music. Thank you for the tales. Trevor Horn. Thank you.